Hello, everyone. I'm feeling quite silly right now for a number of different reasons, probably the last of which is that I am talking to myself in my room. First things first, my hair is a sensory nightmare right now. I box dyed it this morning, which I've done once before, same color, same brand of box dye, and I was kind of just waiting for it to air dry. And it's not really doing that. Like, it's been a couple of hours, and given the sort of crunchy consistency of my hair, I am gonna go ahead and say that that's because that the product didn't wash out all the way. And so it's just kind of some fun, like, straw hanging down by my shoulders. Actually, you know what? All right, well, that's one of my problems solved. Also, my bangs, I am kind of at the stage where they are too long to work as front bangs because they will be in my eyes and I'm just going to swoop them back anyway. But they're not quite working as like a curtain bang either because they're too short. My other problem is that I have this little baby microphone that I bought off of Amazon, sorry, and it is not compatible with my camera, but I have too much pride to either like return it and get a new one that is compatible or to just not use it altogether. So it's like I'm doing like a voice memo on my phone that I'm going to try to sync to the video footage when I edit, but we'll see. It might just be for nothing. But feeling otherwise good, festive. I'm feeling very Christmassy with my red socks and green sweatshirt. I have a little cup of tea. I have my little miniature Christmas tree and stocking over there. And as you can see from what I have next to me, today we are going to be talking about all of the books that I read in 2025. I'm on track to hit 63. So 63 or 64? I think 63 books by the end of 2025, which is the most books that I've read in one year ever. And that's probably largely due to the last 4-ish months of the year I've been like unemployed and have had a lot more time to read. And it's just been one of my favorite hobbies this year. I really enjoy watching videos like this, even like ones on TikTok, and like to hear other people's book recommendations and book reviews. And I get most of my book recommendations from people talking about books on the internet. So I thought this would be a fun first video or return video to film for YouTube. I've also been flirting with having like a video component for my Substack blog. So I'm planning to upload a what I read this year Substack blog as well. If you learn better by reading instead of listening. So I do have my phone here with me with my Goodreads pulled up because that's how I keep track of all of my star ratings and reviews and things like that. So I might be referencing that throughout the video. And then I also have my laptop here just so that I can keep track of all the genres and things that I have categorized as well. So as far as genres go, I have broken up all of the books that I read this year into about 9 different like genres and subgenres. So we're going to start off with fantasy, then romance, then other fiction, and then for nonfiction books, we have yoga, nature, women and feminism, poetry, health related, and autobiographies slash other books. Just because I figured that'd be the easiest way to section the video if you're someone who's not really interested in reading nonfiction or fiction or whatever, you can kind of skip through as you see fit. So starting with the fantasy books, and starting strong with Sarah J. Maas books. So I started this year by finishing up the Court of Thorns and Roses series. In 2024, I started my ACOTAR reread. So I read the first 2 books in the tail end of 2024 and then continued my reread into this year. Of Court of Thorns and Roses is one of my all-time favorite fantasy series, one of my favorite book series probably. So this is the 3rd book in the series, the novella, or people call it like the Christmas edition, and then the final book that she has written. And I went into this reread, I think, hoping that if I dragged it out for long enough, that by the time I finished this reread, she would have already announced the release date for the next book in the series. I think we're supposed to get at least 2 more, but alas, she has not, which is okay. But I did fully annotate the series. I have the other 2 on my shelf as well. Marked tabs for all the valuable moments. I can make a separate video about how I annotate books if that's something that you would be interested in. I gave the entire Court of Thorns and Roses series 5 stars. I've given every book in the series 5 stars, and I feel no shame or embarrassment in saying that. I think they're amazing books. I think Sarah J. Maas is an incredible writer. They're very well written. I think they get kind of shat on a lot as being like fairy word I can't say, but really that's such a small element of the books. I think they're much more about this incredible world and the romance between the characters. And yeah, I love this series. I have my Valaris sweatshirt on today, which is one of the main settings in the book series. On that note, getting a little less positive, we have the Crescent City series by Sarah J. Maas. So, confession, this video I am lying a little bit because there are 2 books out of the 63 that are still in progress. So I've finished these 2, House of Earth and Blood and House of Sky and Breath, and then I have just barely started on House of Flame and Shadow. And I'm not gonna lie, reading these feels like homework. It feels like a homework assignment. I don't feel excited to pick up the 3rd book. Like ACOTAR blew my expectations out of the water, and this series just kind of dulls in comparison. And I read Throne of Glass too, which is it's her only completed series, I think, and Throne of Glass was amazing. I think I gave all those books either 4 or 5 stars. I've given these 2 3. Yeah, to be completely honest, the only reason that I am reading the 3rd one is because I know that this book, mini spoiler alert if you haven't read them yet, but I think most people who read SJM know this, the 3rd book in the series does tie in the characters from ACOTAR, so it's kind of like a crossover series. And I have heard that if you don't finish Crescent City, you probably won't understand what goes on in the following ACOTAR books that are released. So I'm gonna finish it. It's just taking me a long time. I feel like the books are unnecessarily long, like 800 plus pages for every book in the series, and there's so many characters and plot points to keep track of that reading it just feels very difficult. Not that I'm opposed to books that feel difficult to read, but it does kind of feel like homework, and it's almost like I don't care enough about the main characters to like want to do the homework. But I'm gonna keep reading it. It's just an okay series for me and doesn't really compare to Sarah J. Maas's other work. Moving on in fantasy, I also read Onyx Storm this year. Onyx Storm is the third book in the Empyrean series behind Fourth Wing and Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. It's a beautiful copy. Like, I love the look of this book. Just can I say? I'll give the look a little moment before I start to tear it apart. And if I don't have the physical copy of the book, I'll put like a picture of it up so that you can get a visual of what the cover looks like. Onyx Storm to me was a major disappointment. And I don't think that that's an unpopular consensus from what I've seen amongst Rebecca Yarros and Fourth Wing fans. I feel like this book dragged on and on and on. It felt very rushed, which to a certain extent I think it was. I think she did have a pretty short time in between the second book and the third book, this one, to get it out. And unfortunately, I do think that shows in the writing and the lack of any real plot to follow in this book. I feel like I've tried to tell myself that it's just like a filler episode, like how shows have, and that the fourth book and fifth book are going to be a lot better, and this was kind of just filler material. There were some aspects of it that I really liked. I liked that Xaden returns to the school as like a professor. I liked that we got to see a little bit more of Violet's family and other younger siblings of characters come to the school and things like that. But overall, this book just kind of fell flat for me. I think I devoured Fourth Wing and Iron Flame in a matter of like a week each. And this took me like months to get through. It wasn't my favorite. I think I gave this 3 stars, but in the average, maybe I take back what I said earlier because the average on Goodreads is over 4. So maybe it's not as popular a consensus that I thought, that it's not good. Okay, I read The Song of Achilles and Circe by Madeline Miller. Madeline or Madeline Miller, I'm not exactly sure how she pronounces it. So The Song of Achilles is the story of sort of a love story between Achilles and Patroclus, his childhood best friend, and follows them through adulthood and Achilles becoming this amazing soldier and Patroclus kind of being in the shadows as his underlooked sidekick of sorts. I gave The Song of Achilles 4 stars. I do think it's a beautiful love story and it's incredibly well written. I think it's a little bit hard for me to get into fantasy books that are kind of like Greek mythology or not based off of reality, like it is fantasy, but more of kind of reads like a historical fiction, if you know what I mean. The end was heartbreaking. Again, it's poetic, it's beautiful. Just to rate a book 5 stars, I have to really devour it. And while I did enjoy reading this book, it didn't quite hit that 5-star mark for me, but Song of Achilles was still very, very good. And then similarly, Circe, I also gave 4 stars. Not a romance. Actually, might be like whatever the opposite of a romance book is. I struggled a little bit with the pacing of Circe. I just felt like the pacing from her childhood to adolescence into adulthood was a little bit off, just because it does take place over her like like 500-year life. But it is a really cool story and I would recommend it if you're into Greek mythology. There is a trigger warning in this book for depictions of sexual assault, so if that's something that's going to be triggering to you, I forget exactly what chapter that is, but just be aware of that. Next, I read Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. This is the first Brandon Sanderson book that I have read, and I read it with my book club. I enjoyed Tress of the Emerald Sea. It does read a lot more like a young adult fiction. I even listened to it on audiobook, and the characters are, children, so it's very kind of whimsical and childlike. But I think just the nature of it being a YA fiction, I did find myself a little bit bored during parts of the book. The story follows Tress, who is our protagonist. She's a young girl that lives on a small island that develops a friendship with a young boy, Charlie, whose family is much wealthier, and ultimately she goes on a journey to find him after he's been taken away by his father, and along the voyage she becomes sort of master of this ship and meets all these crazy characters at sea. I wouldn't consider it a favorite by any means, but I would be curious to read Brandon Sanderson's other work because I know that he is a very popular writer for more adult fiction as well. And then last but not least, for fantasy, I read and annotated the Cruel Prince series by Holly Black. This is one of my favorite fantasy series. I gave all of these books, or I gave the first two 4 stars and the last one 5 stars. So the series follows Jude as our main character. She has a twin sister, Taryn, and then an older sister, Vivi. They are stolen from the human realm as children, which you can get into if you read the book, and taken away to the magical Isle of Elfame. Their father is the general for the royal family, so he's a prominent figure in society, which provides them a little bit of protection. Jude very much desires to forge her own path and find her own way to make a name for herself. And then this whole series sort of follows an enemies to lovers story with Prince Carden, who is one of like 6 or 7 prince and princesses of the kingdom. There's a lot of banter, there's a lot of yearning. I really love the magic in the world in this book series. I think it's very whimsical. So Holly Black also wrote the Spiderwick Chronicles, and I haven't read those, but I watched the movies when I was a kid, and the characters I can very much see in my mind as the characters that are in the Spiderwick Chronicles. All right, now getting into our romance category, books that is romance books that are not fantasy books in nature. I read My Fault by Mercedes Ron. I hope that's how you say that. I think it's a Hispanic name. And I read this because of the My Fault London movie that came out on Amazon Prime earlier this year. Now, is this movie going to win any Oscars? No. Is it probably going to win any awards at all? No. Was it particularly good? No. Did I watch it like 3 times in the span of a week? Yes, I did. So naturally, when I found out that My Fault London is actually based off of a book series, I was like, okay, well, obviously I gotta read this. This is one of those rare cases where the movie that a book was based off of is better than the book itself, I'm afraid to say. But the story follows Nick and Noah. It is a step-sibling romance, so if that's something that's gonna ick you out, don't even worry about it. I gave it 2 stars. I found it pretty painfully Wattpad cringe. There's also some trigger warnings for domestic violence and sexual assault, and I wouldn't recommend reading it, but to each in their own. I read 2 books by Ali Hazelwood this year. I read The Love Hypothesis and Love on the Brain, which are part of the same series. If you don't know, Ali Hazelwood is kind of known for her academic romance books. The Love Hypothesis follows Olive, who is a PhD candidate, and then Adam, who is a professor at the university. I would describe this as very much like the black cat golden retriever dynamic, where Adam is definitely more reserved and closed off, and Olive is a little bit more outgoing. this is being made into a film adaptation with Lily Reinhart, which I'm really excited about. I gave this book 4 stars. My only real qualm with it was that it's one of those stories where the main characters are just so aloof, it seems, to the fact that the other person likes them, and that really annoys me in stories because it's like. And then Love on the Brain, I gave 3 stars. It just wasn't as good as The Love Hypothesis for me. Instead of a school dynamic, this one follows 2 researchers at NASA. I think they're researching how to make safe like astronaut helmets or something like that. So they're paired together on this project together, and then come to find out that they were actually kind of enemies when they were in school. So they have a little bit of a history. And then obviously, as they continue working on the project together, things start to happen, chemistry starts to bubble. So really good in theory, but in execution, I again found it really annoying just how I'm supposed to forget that these people are smart enough to be in a PhD program, but somehow also dumb enough to not realize that they're in love with each other. Like, I think so. Overall, I thought it was just okay. I've also read some other books by Ali Hazelwood that didn't blow me out of the water, so I don't have any others on my like TBR currently, but if you have any Ali Hazelwood books that you think are really good, let me know and I'd be open to giving them a shot. Next, I read Just One Season by Chrissy Hopewell. This was a hockey romance book that I actually picked up at a author event in Cincinnati. I went with my boyfriend's older sister and sister-in-law because we're all in book club together and our friends, and it was an event where all the authors kind of gave a spiel about their new book, and then as part of your ticket to the event you got to take one of those books home with you. Hockey player is a single father. Female main character just got out of a long-term engagement or relationship. She's doing like PR for the team or something like that. I thought this book was cute. I gave it 3 stars. Okay, I read It Happened One Summer and Hook, Line, and Sinker, both by Tessa Bailey. These books kind of remind me of the movie Wild Child, if you've ever seen that, where this go-getter beach girl, crazy girl, gets sent off to like a British boarding school, but in this book, instead of a British boarding school, it's like the seaside, like a random town in Maine or something. And she, of course, inevitably ends up finding a young, handsome sailor who is widowed. And again, dark, brooding, doesn't want anything to do with LA Barbie, but you know, you know, things happen. I gave both of these books 4 stars. I thought they were really cute. I ate them up in no time flat. The spice is amazing. And yeah, I think they're really fun reads for the summer, especially if you're going to the beach or the pool. Plop out that book, really immerses you in the setting of the book. And then lastly, for romance with my book club, I read People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry, which is also getting adapted into a movie in like next month. So I'm excited to watch that. It has Tom Blythe in it, who... Okay, I rated it 3 stars. I thought I might have rated it 4, but I couldn't remember. Yeah, this was the first book that I have read by Emily Henry. I know she's super popular in like rom-com type books. Again, I'm learning something about myself and reading my reviews right now, which is that one of my biggest qualms with romance books, or something that turns me off from a romance book instantly, is when there are 2 people that are clearly a perfect match and perfect for each other, and somehow it still takes them like over a decade to realize that, and it ends up causing a bunch of like arguments and stuff. I don't know. I feel like it just makes me have to suspend like how real life works and like what would happen in reality for these characters that don't exist. All right, so then for the rest of my fiction books, I kind of just grouped them all together because I didn't feel like there was enough to like sort them independently after that. I read Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. This was a 5-star read for me. I thought the story of the main character as a woman in STEM in the 60s was amazing and really powerful. There is a romance element to this book, but I would not classify it as a romance. I love the main character. I love to see her story develop through grief and motherhood and academia and career, and think it just paints a great depiction of being a likable woman, especially during that time. I read The Secret Life of Bees by Sue Monk Kidd. This is also a movie, and I have watched the movie before, but I have not read the book before. I thought this book was pretty good. I read it with my book club. It is a historical fiction. Our main character is I think, 13-year-old girl living in rural South Carolina in the 60s, and ends up fleeing her abusive home life to stay with a family of Black women that own a honey farm, thus the name The Secret Life of Bees. I gave it 4 stars. All right, I read Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. This is the new Hunger Games book that came out this year, which we are taken back to the 50th Hunger Games, which is the second quarter quell, which is Haymitch's Hunger Games. I gave this book 5 stars. I've given most of the Hunger Games books 5 stars, I think. This was beautiful. It was so cool to see Beatty and Wyrus, and getting to see characters that we've read about in the previous books when they were much younger. Mags is in this book as well. Obviously, President Snow and the like is in this book. Effie, as she comes into her fashion career. And yeah, I think Haymitch's story is a really powerful one in the series. And I think this came out at a very interesting time and political landscape. I am very excited for the movie to come out next November. I read Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare. I had to read this play as like a freshman in high school and haven't since. But great story. It's a classic, and I picked up a copy at a thrift store, so I wanted to read it. I read The Handmaid's Tale and The Testaments by Margaret Atwood. Now, I did read these after I had watched the show, so I did kind of know what was going to happen already in the premise of the story already. But if you're not familiar, The Handmaid's Tale is a dystopian story by Margaret Atwood that takes place in a patriarchal regime where the United States has been taken over by sort of a terrorist group. And the United States is renamed Gilead, and women are pretty much imprisoned either as wives, as Marthas, who are like cooks, as aunts who essentially teach the handmaids and lead the schools and that kind of stuff, or as handmaids who are responsible for bearing the children in the society. I've heard there's a show for The Testaments coming out as well, which I would be obviously stoked to watch. I think the Handmaid's Tale show, was really well done. I read Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Again, I read this with my book club. It was one of the most popular bestsellers, or at least romance bestsellers, that came out in 2025. This is a sapphic romance, a lesbian love story between 2 women in STEM in the 70s, 80s? I don't remember, but it's a wonderful historical fiction. I gave it 5 stars. Also listen to this on audiobook. Phenomenal audiobook if you want to listen to it instead of read. All right, this is my second sort of fib for this video because I'm not quite done with it, but Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. It's a classic. I'm reading this with my book club right now. I have 200-ish pages left, maybe 300. And I have read Little Women before. It's just been a long time, so I'm getting to kind of go through and mark it up for the first time. Yeah, this is a 5-star read for me. This will probably always be a 5-star read for me. I'm obsessed with Little Women, and this is a really fun time of year to be reading it as well. I don't know, I feel like the vibes of Little Women are just very cozy and cutesy, and stories of family and bonding and sisterhood and all the things. So I'll probably watch the movie after I've finished reading it. And then lastly, for my fiction books, I read all 7 of the Popularity Papers books by Amy Ignatow. You know those books that you remember reading in like late elementary school, early middle school that are like formative for the rest of your taste in reading, and you just like remember them so vividly? The Popularity Papers is that series. The Popularity Papers books are kind of like the Dork Diaries. They're like graphic novel style books, or maybe like Diary of a Wimpy Kid even, but follows 2 best friends from like age 10 to like 14 maybe by the end of the 7th book. But yeah, they're cute and adorable, and even though they're like children's books, I'm still counting them. Whew. Okay, I was getting sweaty, so I'm gonna switch to a t-shirt. It's cold. So I've split my nonfiction up into a few categories. I'm going to start with yoga books. So I got my 200-hour yoga teacher training this year. So there was a lot of required reading as part of that, and then there's just a lot of reading that, not a lot of reading, but I read some books on the side to supplement my learning about yoga because I wanted to make sure that I was covering all my bases. Starting with the more hefty textbooks, I did read The Heart of Yoga in its entirety. This is what it looks like. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce that, but this is who it is written by. Next, also required reading for my course, I read The Yamas and the Niyamas by Deborah Adele. There are 5 yamas and 5 niyamas, which are the sort of base principles for all yogic teaching. And 4 stars, great book, easy to read. This is a book that my aunt gave me, who is also a yoga teacher. It's called The Tree of Yoga. Also don't know how to pronounce that author's name. Another textbook, I read The Key Muscles of Yoga. Mostly pictures, as you can see, but it is really helpful. I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to anatomy and physiology, and I'm very visual when it comes to that kind of stuff. And even in my teaching, I like to use correct anatomical cueing. So it was a good refresh from my group fitness instructor course to just know certain cues to use in each pose based on what the muscles in the body is actually doing. I also read the Bhagavad Gita, which was not required as part of my yoga teacher training. I think it should have been. It's one of the base texts for Hindu scripture. And I'm not an expert on world religion, so don't quote me on this, but Hinduism and yoga are tied deeply together. And then lastly, kind of in the realm of yoga and spirituality, I read Buddhism for Beginners by Judith Yandel. This book I picked up for like $1 at a used book sale, and I just thought it would be interesting to read. It was okay. I think there are better books you could read about Buddhism for beginners. I gave it 3 stars. All right, moving on to nature-based nonfiction books. I read Slow Seasons by Rosie Steer. Slow Seasons talks about the Celtic wheel and the Celtic calendar. I have actually written a blog post about my takeaways from this book. So in the US and in, I guess, a lot of Western society, we look at the year in 4 parts, whereas the Celtic wheel acknowledges the year as like 8 different parts and acknowledges, instead of like the 4 seasons, acknowledging the solstices and the like the in-between solstices. I'm blanking on the exact word that I'm looking for, but they're midpoints, the midpoints of the year. It's a really beautifully illustrated book. I would recommend getting the physical copy if you can. She recommends crafts and recipes and nature practices to do during that specific time of the year. This is a 5-star book for me. It completely changed the way that I think about the calendar year and the changing of the seasons. I read Shinrin Yoku by King Lee. Shinrin Yoku is the term for forest bathing, obviously coined in Japan. I read 100 Plants That Heal by Gerard Dubois. This is, again, sort of like a picture book. I wish I'm actually gifting it to one of my relatives who's also into plant medicine for Christmas, so I have it wrapped up and I don't have it with me. But it was a really good read. It was, every page would show you a plant, and then on the other side it was kind of like a journal entry of the uses, historical uses for that plant, any like syrups or tinctures that you can make for that plant, mythology related to that plant, and it obviously, as the name would suggest, covered 100 plants total. Read The Apothecary of Belonging by Alexis J. Cunningfolk. This is a really beautiful book. It came out just this past November, so I did pre-order the copy because I was really excited about it. This is also a great book for beginners in herbalism, or if you're interested in plant medicine and witchcraft and that kind of stuff. Again, take anything that isn't written by an MD with a grain of salt, but I feel like it was very well done and beautifully illustrated as well. Next, I read The Last Child in the Woods by Richard Louv, Saving Our Children from Nature Deficit Disorder. But this book was recommended to me by a coworker. So for the first 8 months of the year, I was working at a local nonprofit as an environmental educator, so teaching kids from inner city schools about the environment, which was really cool and something I hope to continue doing for the rest of my career. But I think this is a valuable book, even if you aren't an educator, don't consider yourself an educator. If you are planning to have children one day, or have children in your lives, or are just interested about child psychology in general, this is a great book that talks a lot about a lot of the gaps in learning that need to be filled with outdoor play and time in nature. I read Nature's Ways by Ruth Binney, Lore, Legend, Fact, and Fiction. Let's just take a moment for how pretty this book is. Beautiful copy. I got this, again, at like a used bookstore for pretty cheap, and I just thought it was really beautiful, but it's kind of similar to the 100 Plants book in that it talks about mostly animals and the lore and mythology that surrounds them. It's an easy read. You can read it in a day. I gave it 4 stars. And then lastly, for environmental books, I read Living Resistance by Caitlin Curtis. This book was okay. I was expecting it to be a little bit more centered around indigenous wisdom than it was. It felt more of like an author who is very angry about the current political climate and was using it to talk about herself a lot and not as much about indigenous wisdom. I gave that book 3 stars. All right, I'm back with a charged camera battery and hopefully hair that it still kind of smells like the hair dye. I tried to really shampoo all of that out of there, but I don't know what I did wrong this time around. We'll just have to hope for the best. Anyways, we are moving on. We're almost done. We only have about 13 books left. My next nonfiction category is women/feminism. For this, I read Eve by Kat Bohannon, and Eve is basically the evolution of the female form from when we were very, very basic cells all the way through to more possum looking creatures, all the way to modern day humans, and how women's bodies have developed to be more resilient. This was definitely a very dense read, but a very good one. And if you're someone who's interested in biology, I would recommend it. I also read On Our Best Behavior by Elise Loenin. So it's On Our Best Behavior, The Price Women Pay to Be Good. And it explores how the 7 deadly sins, how those are weaponized against women, and how patriarchal Christianity, or really patriarchal religion as a whole, has used these to keep women in check. I thought it was a really interesting read and something that I had never thought of before in terms of the 7 deadly sins being particularly like harmful ideas for women specifically. And I'm sure you could apply this to other marginalized groups as well. Pressure to be a good woman or a good girl in society, and something that I think all women could resonate with. I read 3 poetry books this year. I read Devotions by Mary Oliver. Mary Oliver is my favorite poet. I love how much of her poetry surrounds nature and just the beauty of being alive and the beauty of the mundane and finding joy in simplicity. Devotions encapsulates some of her best poetry across the decades of her writing career. 5 stars, would recommend. I also read Make Believe by Victoria Hutchins. If you are active on social media, you might have seen her. I think became popular sort of going from her like girl boss lawyer, corporate lawyer, marathon runner lifestyle to a more slow pace of living and falling in love with yoga. And I also read I Hope You Remember by Josie Balka, who also I think kind of came to fame with her poetry through TikTok and social media, if I'm not mistaken. I give it 4 stars. For more health-related books, I read The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Very popular, very good, 5-star read for me. Good Energy by Dr. Casey Means. I think she actually co-wrote it with her sibling. I gave this book 2 stars. I think it's hard for me to know an author's intentions when writing a book, but I was not surprised when I was reading the book and then doing research on the author to find that she had been on Tucker Carlson's show, she had been on Joe Rogan's show, and is involved in a lot of harmful rhetoric online surrounding health and supplementation. I think this book came across to me as very, very privileged, sort of attacking big pharma and also placing a lot of the onus on the individual for systemic health problems. Not everything, there were things she said in the book that were true and valid points, but I think her approach of saying, well, if you want to be healthy, you should go get a glucose monitor and demand all these expensive labs to be tested and only buy food from this, that, and the other source comes across as very rich white woman to me. And I don't think that Casey Means is a particularly skilled writer. I also read Smart Sex by Emily Morse and Come Together by Emily Nagoski, which are two books about sex and human sexuality. They were both very good. I gave them both 4 stars. I also have Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski on my shelf. She's a really great writer, and they are both, her and Emily Morse are both experts on human sexuality, particularly helpful for women and for queer people. So definitely check it out. I don't know, I find sexuality a really interesting topic to read about. And then lastly, I read How to Break Up with Your Phone by Catherine Price. This isn't exactly what I was expecting. I think I gave it 3 stars. It came across as more of like a 28 days to fix your relationship with technology, which wasn't necessarily what I was looking for. And then lastly, for my autobiographies / other category, I read The House of My Mother by Sherry Frankie. If you are online in any capacity, you probably heard of the Ruby Frankie 8 Passengers scandal as it's come out over the last several years. Sherry Frankie is Ruby Frankie's eldest daughter, and she tells her story of emotional abuse, some physical abuse, and some sexual abuse as well. So just be mindful of that if you are wanting to read this book. I also watched the documentary that came out on, I think, Hulu, The Devil in the Family, which also depicts a lot of the abuse that happened in the Frankie family. Yeah, it was really dark, really interesting to hear the perspective of the child vlogging thing from a child who has been vlogged from a very early age. I do think that Sherry was this close to realizing that the cause of a lot of her trauma and the trauma within her family is deeply rooted in the cult of Mormonism. So that was the only part of her story that felt a little bit off to me. But as far as memoirs go, especially for someone so young, very, very good. Another sort of coming out of religion memoir I read, On Her Knees by Brenda Marie Davies. She formerly was God is Gray on YouTube, and I really loved her YouTube channel. All right, my camera did die again, so I am going to continue this because I only have 2 books left and probably about 30 minutes until it's dark outside. I read The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. This is a 5-star read for me and one of my new favorites. John Green is an incredible writer. Each chapter depicts kind of a different aspect of humanity, and his writing is so just witty and funny, as well as deeply emotional and sad at times. This book will make you feel all the human emotions. Would recommend. Last but not least, I read the Bible this year. Yeah, I read the Bible. As you can see, I have some thoughts, and I think I might even make a separate video about my thoughts about the Bible because there's a lot to unpack. There's a lot to unpack here. What would I rate the Bible on a star rating? I don't know. I think I'm just going to leave it without a rating for now, but let me know if you want to hear a more in-depth video about my thoughts on the Bible. And I wanted to end this video just by talking about my sort of reading goals for 2026. I'm planning to make a video about my goals for 2026 as a whole, so I won't say too much, but I definitely want to get into a lot of the classic series this year. So the Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, Chronicles of Narnia. Um, Again, I'm not that into Greek mythology. I don't think I can get myself to reread Percy Jackson. Um, I would like to read Red Rising this year, is another big one that's been on my list. Continue my environmental education, but delve more into Native American and Indigenous wisdom specifically. And there are also a few of the classics that are on my list. Of course, with the new Frankenstein movie coming out, I want to read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, is big on my list, maybe when Halloween comes around next year. I have a copy of Pride and Prejudice and a copy of Jane Eyre that I've been wanting to reread and annotate. So that's on my list. Crime and Punishment, um, Anne of Green Gables, just stuff like that, of more classic literature that I feel like I'm missing out on by not um, having those under my belt. But yeah, this video is probably going to be really long, but I hope that you enjoyed it. And if you have any books that you read this year, or just books that you read, period, that based on my reading tastes you would recommend, feel free to comment them or let me know. And yeah, I hope everyone has happy holidays, and I will see you in the new year.